After the explosive and equally devastating eruption of the last Soufriere volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, unfortunately, the Grantley Adams International Airport had to be closed. Now, after 7 days of extensive cleaning, the airport was reopened on April 16th. We're going to talk to a number of high-ranking officials to find out how the airport was reopened, what went into reopening the airport, and also the work that's continuing to be done. We're going to start tonight with CEO of the airport, Hadley Bourne. Hadley, thank you for joining us.
Hi, good evening, Shane.
Okay, tell me about the overarching running of the airport, especially within these times, COVID-19 as well as a volcanic eruption.
Well, Shane, as you would well know, COVID has significantly devastated the tourism industry across the world, and we would have probably lost 95% of our revenue earning capacity due to COVID, and it's put an extenuating strain on our resources. And we were beginning to see some light of return to activity after most of our source markets would have begun to come out of their lockdowns, then to be hit with this other devastation and natural disaster in terms of the volcanic explosion.
So right now, all across the world, because of COVID-19, safety is one of the biggest words that anyone has to say. So coupled with a volcanic eruption, now tell me about the safety in the airport, especially in terms of your staff.
Well, even before I get into the safety of the staff, what I would like to mention, I want to thank the staff of the Grantley Adams International Airport. They would have been working continuously since Friday after the eruption, a 24-hour operation to get the facility reopened. And I just want a heartfelt thanks to the staff, especially custodial and engineering teams. They've done a fantastic job. I mean, we're getting better improvements day by day, especially with the reduction of ash in the atmosphere. But I want to, from the bottom of my heart, sincerely thank them on behalf of the management and staff, board of directors, and the entire country. As you mentioned, asked about in terms of safety, we were all masked up and wearing various PPE pertaining for COVID. But what you will find is that in dealing with the volcanic ash, it almost called for an increased level of different type of PPE. And we had significant challenges with the type of respirators we had available for the staff. They were not necessarily filtering the fine ash. The other shields that we would have had for COVID were not necessarily appropriate for cleaning. And it happened at a time when most of the businesses in Barbados were closed, and we had significant difficulties in getting the correct PPE for the staff. Thankfully, some of corporate Barbados reached out and would have donated some of this stuff. And even from an operational point of view, we also were hampered because we then made an order, but we could not get the order in until the airport was reopened. So we are making sure that our staff are comfortable where they carry out this job. I mean, we remove significant amounts of ash from the facility, and we're just trying to make sure that they are well equipped and safe. On Monday, we would have had our health and safety team do an assessment to make sure that the various, not only for our staff, but the general private and public spaces were fit for use beyond the runway, because as I say, we normally divide the airport into landside and airside. Most persons only recognize the landside aspect of it. That's the airside aspect of it, where aircraft operation, but there's a lot that happens behind the scene on the land side to make the customer experience one that is pleasurable.
Okay, can you tell us a bit about what goes on the land side?
Well, basically on the land side, what we will find is those, what we call the below wing activities and above wing activities for aviation. So you have your check-in and your baggage handling areas, the various restaurants and other office facilities, because all of those play a part in making your flight successful. So, and then there's still another other public areas, the post office, shore pier, those kind of places that we also have to ensure that the general public, even if they're a traveling passenger, had quite decent facilities to return to when we reopen.
I'm very glad to hear that you made sure that the staff got the education as well as the proper protective gear and to go through this time. Another thing I want to turn to is that when we look and we see how quickly things were done and how well things were done, people may talk about water wastage. Talk to me a bit about the water that's being used for the cleanup.
Well, we are using a significant amount of water in our cleanup campaign, and I guess we are going through a significant drought, and I'm sure the Prime Minister would have mentioned this. And one of the resources we would have utilized is salt water. We're using a lot of salt water to wash down the public car parks and other staff car park areas and the roadways leading into and around the airport. And then we've also reached out to both government and the other corporate Barbados in terms of wastewater treatment. So we're using a significant amount of wastewater treatment, both from the sewage plant in town and also from Coverley. I think I would have seen the report this morning that for the last 3 or 4 days, we've probably used over 50,000 gallons of wastewater from Coverley alone. Our stakeholder partners with the construction aspect in Barbados, Jose and Jose is on site, COW Williams, Infra, most of the major construction firms that the Prime Minister had mentioned in her earlier press conference, and they're here on a continuous basis, both day and night, helping us to keep the dust down. Also the Ministry of Agriculture, what we've employed is also those tractor booms that you would normally use for spraying agricultural crops. We're actually using them to help irrigate the airfield to just keep the dust down to a minimum. So we're using a substantial amount of what you would call non-potable water because we are well aware of the challenges that we're having right now in the country.
I know straight across the world, the eyes are on everybody, but given what's happened with the volcano, a lot of eyes are on us as well. And I'm sure our airline partners will be looking at, do you have a message for them? What would you say to them at this time?
Well, I would have already said the message to them. We would have held a number of meetings with our stakeholders in the airline industry before we returned. Most of them would have had various requests of what we were doing. We would have shared our mitigation plans with them. Since we would return our first major flights on Friday, we would have reached out, had reports on what they have found, what the challenges were. Most of them were quite pleased. We're not getting too much into the technical stuff, but they were more concerned about dust and maybe the braking action on the runway, which all passed the various requirements. So all of our stakeholders have returned. I think we would have had Virgin return yesterday. British Airways and JetBlue were on Saturday. They were on board. American followed. We had a meeting with the senior persons from Air Canada. They'll be doing a humanitarian flight tomorrow for farm workers, and then they're set to return on May the 9th. So basically, most of our major source market stakeholders are on board, along with the other interregional carriers. They've all been flying. So I think the initial report, because it's ongoing, is that they're very much satisfied with what we've done and what we've achieved.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask, because a lot of people are saying a lot of things. People sit as armchair analysts and they view videos and think they know what's happening. Mm-hmm. But you just identified that a number of your major airlines already came back. And those ones that came back, have they identified any problems? Are they not wanting to come back?
No, none of them have indicated such. Even from the engineering point of view, most of them would have had their aircraft inspected as precautionary measures, not just from possible ash at the airdrome, which is the airport, but also in the upper atmosphere. And most of those reports would have come back negative, that the engines and everything were fine. There are a lot of technical equipment on aircraft, pitot-static tubes, etc. So most of them, as an abundance of caution, would have done these post-flight inspections, and they said they were fine. They were fine and started to increase their turnaround. I mean, I think on the first Saturday we had the 2 Americans, 2 JetBlues, 2 British. So that just goes to show the confidence that the airline partners have in us reopening.
And the final thing I want to ask you, because people always want to know that you're doing the right thing, mm-hmm. I want to ask you about corporate social responsibility with regard to the Grantley Adams International Airport.
Well, our corporate social responsibility is significant. I mean, we sit amidst a very densely populated area and our surrounding districts, Gamswick, Fair Valley, Parishland, and I think the latter 2 more so have been affected significantly in recent times, not just by the ash-related atmosphere, but we've been carrying out a runway rehabilitation project from late 2019, which was, it was supposed to last 4 months, but due to COVID and various delays, they've had to endure more than reasonable conditions from dust and now ash So what we've endeavored to do is to go into the community. We always had a part of the contract with the runway contractor to go into the community and see what their needs are. And now as we are getting to a point where the ashfall and the emits from the airport are diminishing, we are about to increase that campaign again and go back to see how we can assist, how best we can make them comfortable as we both all endure this together.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. Okay, we're going to move on over to Tracy Ford Bailey, who's the Director of Civil Aviation. She's going to speak to us about safety and the regulations. Tracy, thank you for speaking with us, first of all.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Let's talk about the closure and then the reopening of the airport, because I know that you are going to be strict to ICAO standards. People are going to be seeing a lot of dust and saying, but I can still see a lot of ash. How has the airport been reopened? So speak to us about the closure and then what had to happen for the safe reopening of the airport.
The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, is an agency of the United Nations, and the agency is responsible for the development of the international standards that governs various aviation activity across the globe. The ICAO standards supports the safe, the efficient, and secure civil aviation system. Barbados, as an ICAO contracting state, have adopted the international standards, which ensures a safe operation at our airport and in turn permits airport operations. In respect to the airport operations, a number of standards that have been adopted were reviewed by the Barbados Civil Aviation Department to reopen the airport last Friday. Some of those standards include Article 15 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, whereby the airport has the responsibility to provide a safe and uniform conditions for aircraft operating from another contracting state. We also review Article 28, which permits airport operations and air navigation services as well. The Civil Aviation Department, in its oversight and advisory role, and with the intent to open the airport at the highest level, practical level of aviation safety, also review ICAO Annex 14, which further stipulates the international standards for airport operations as well.
Okay, so when the decision was made to reopen the airport, this wasn't any local decision. This was a decision that had to come within international standards.
Correct. That is correct. So during the week of the volcanic activity, Civil engaged in a number of international agencies, including ICAO, the Volcanic Ash Advisory Center, the Area Control Center in Trinidad and Tobago Civil Aviation Authority, because the main intention was to reopen our airspace and the airport in a more systematic manner.
So it's one thing to reopen the airport, but then keeping it open,
Yes.
how do you track and measure that it's still in good stead for air traffic?
First of all, in order to ensure that the Grantley Adams International Airport conform to our regulatory requirements and the international standard, a state must establish a safety oversight system. And the safety oversight is the function by which a contracting state would endeavor to effectively implement ICAO standards and recommended practices. So as such, the aviation safety inspectors within the Barbados Civil Aviation Department, under the primary aviation legislation, the Civil Aviation Act, dedicated its authority to exercise regulatory powers to conduct its oversight activity, which is expected when we're encountering such a situation and disasters and volcanic activity. And this, of course, is to ensure that there's no imminent threat to aviation safety. So that was done. The civil aviation team during the last week conducted a series of inspections and monitoring activities to be able to determine the operational status of our international airport.
Okay. And when the decision, my final question, when the decision was finally made, yes, we were able to reopen, you are satisfied that the Grantley Adams International Airport passed all those inspections?
Yes, when the final decision was made, it was based on the level of compliance as demonstrated by the airport operator. So as I mentioned before, the Civil Aviation Department conducted a series of inspections which was necessary to determine the operational status at our international airport.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to turn our focus to the Minister of Tourism and International Transport, Senator the Honorable Lisa Cummins. And she's going to talk about this extensive cleanup of the Grantley Adams International Airport. Senator Cummins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Shay.
Okay, no problem. People are saying that this has been the most extensive, biggest cleanup of the airport ever. Tell us generally about what had to go on to get it to a state of readiness.
I think perhaps I don't even need to tell you. I think many of us saw the videos that were shared about the airport being completely covered and blanketed in ash. And if we think about our own homes and we think about when we looked outside when the ash stopped falling or even while it was falling, we can imagine what the Grantley Adams International Airport looked like. And so the entire airfield was covered, all of our car parks were covered, air traffic control that directs incoming planes and ensures safety of the airport. The entire area was blanketed in ash. And this was not obviously a facility that you could take brooms and sweep. This required a massive cleanup operation, and here it was that we were in an environment where not only were we dealing with the airport having to deploy its own internal resources, but we recognized very quickly that we needed external help. And so the decision was made by Prime Minister to treat the country, in her words, as a national project, and to ensure that we looked at the resources in their entirety that were available to the country from both the public and the private sector, to identify the priority areas where the resources needed to be deployed for the reopening of the country immediately after the cleanup process started. And the Grantley Adams International Airport obviously was very much at the top of that list. And so we were able to benefit from every major construction contractor in the country with heavy duty equipment. We had vacuum sweepers in here, we had to bring in water trucks, and at one point we ran out of the ability to have water trucks, and I think the CEO will talk a little bit about where we were pulling water from, but this became truly a whole of government approach. And so under the chairmanship of the Minister with responsibility for the Ministry of Transport and Works, the Honourable Ian Gooding-Edgell, a committee was established where all the construction companies were centralized there, and they were deployed across this national project, which is the country. And if we needed resources, we had no issues hesitating calling in there. And for example, I'll tell you, one night around 11 o'clock, I got a call and it said, Minister, we need some additional water trucks. This is after Prime Minister and Minister Ian Gooding-Edgell had already worked with us and all of our engineering teams to get all of the construction teams here, and they said we need additional water trucks. And very quickly, in the dead of the night, we called Saul, and they were able to provide us with old diesel tanks from their old facility, which we then retrofitted to be able to provide additional capacity for water tanks. So this has been a massive operation. We had the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, that was laying topsoil to ensure that we were able to cover the airfield. We had the custodial services that were ensuring that the facilities internal to the airport were cleaned up and prepared for passenger-facing and worker-facing areas. So it started, as you would have seen last week Friday when we announced the reopening of the airport, but it has not stopped. It is a continuous process, because in the same way that if we touch our houses, we touch a surface, we've cleaned an hour ago, but we touch it again and there's more ash because it's such fine dust particles, there are such fine dust particles in there everywhere. So here, there's no way for the purposes of ICAO and air traffic control that this can be a one-stop process. It has to be continuous, and we're committing to ensuring that it remains continuous and current.
It struck me when you said the cleanup of the airport, you couldn't go out, there were brooms.
No.
So, you know, just conceptualizing what needed to be done would have been a massive task, and very weary on your mind thinking about how we're going to do this. How
Yep.
proud were you when you saw, because you said you needed to dip into various resources,
Yep.
how quickly people jumped on and said, yes, I will be a part of this?
When you say national project and many hands make light work and everybody is on board and we're staying the course, all of those are things that are not for single opportunities. We have really been in, I think, We've been talking about it as disaster fatigue. So we've gone from COVID, then we started to deal with the volcano, we started to deal with ash and the cleanup process and all the things that went into it. And I think one thing that we're clear on now is that Barbadians and Barbados has begun to mobilize around critical situations. And this was one of those times where the construction companies did not hesitate. We then called in the National Conservation Commission, and we had another 66 persons. Although it was not an operation for brooms, it still required manpower. And so clearing the areas that were with foliage and so on and getting them ready again, all of those things required effort, and everybody showed up. And we're talking about showing up here and being here on the ground at the airport in the dead of the night because we needed to make sure that we were ready for the following day. We're talking about ensuring that from the afternoon onwards, in between every single arrival, the CEO and his team have been amazing. The custodial teams here at the airport has been amazing. Everyone has literally put up and show up. Every day we have meetings in the morning and every night to review and to plan for the following day, because we're not letting this rest. We're not letting any stone go unturned. We have to protect aircraft safety. We have to ensure that our people work in a safe environment. We have to make sure that what people see when they come to Barbados for the first time, whether it is from on the inside of the aircraft or when they disembark the plane, that it is representative of who we are as a people. And we have to be proud of brand Barbados. So this is where people see first. And we're committed to making sure that it is our best image and that we're able to say to the world and say to Barbadians, boy, this little island has taken a beating. These people from this little island in the Caribbean, southernmost island in the Caribbean, boy, they're dealing with COVID. They're dealing with lockdowns. They're dealing with curfews. And on top of that, if you could have scripted it, you could not have imagined them dealing with volcanic ash. But boy, they're getting up and putting up every single day. And that, Shane, is who we are. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of our people. I'm extraordinarily proud of this airport team and everybody who has come to put their hands to the block, including our construction team and our project managers. They have been extraordinary. That is what Barbados means to me. Very much so.
You speak and you're beaming with pride in terms of everyone that came out, the contractors, the construction companies, the airport staffers, your team, everyone here. When you see the amount of work that went into it, and then it's passing all of these inspections to ICAO standards, and then sometimes some people may look at one video or two videos and may say, I don't think the airport is ready, but they're not sure of what has gone on to get to this state. How do you feel?
I guess that's par for the course, Shane. I mean, one thing I'm clear about, even in my own personal life, a snapshot of a single moment in time doesn't necessarily show you what happens before or what happens afterwards, and it doesn't give you context. So people can only report on what they see in the moment, but it is our responsibility to make sure through transparency, through sharing information openly and readily and in a timely manner, that the full scope of what is there is available for all to see. So we may see one plane, for example, but we don't see the 10 others that have been landing and taking off without any difficulty. And I'm talking about 10 others, including large wide-body commercial jets, as well as charter planes, as well as light aircraft club coming in, as well as cargo planes, for example. So DHL and FedEx, they're flying in and out of Barbados every day. And you know, what's important about that is that just this morning, someone called and they were saying, well, you know, we were supposed to come to Barbados the day before the airport shut down because of the ash. And we were coming in for a personal family event. They had lost a relative and they were coming in, and for 6 days they couldn't get into Barbados. When they land in Barbados and they are here because of the efforts of all of those people who put their hands to the plow, those are the things that say this is who we are, this is why we do what we do. And so yes, there are always going to be negativity, there are always going to be people who will see just a snapshot and think that that is what it is, but we take real pride and real satisfaction in the voices of those people who benefit directly from those efforts that you see on the ground. And so those families that have been stranded in hotels overseas for however long and have wanted to come home, those people who have been waiting to come home to their relatives' funerals and have wanted to be here waiting for the airport to come to open up, those students who are hoping to come home to their families, getting this airport opened was priority number one. And that's what we focused our attention on, and keeping the people who are working safe in the process.
So Minister Cummins, you spoke about everything and the resources that you pulled from right here in Barbados. But this wasn't only a local effort, was it?
No, not at all. We were able to benefit from the U.S. Geological Survey, for example. We had ICAO working very closely with air traffic control. There were other countries, for example, who have experienced volcanoes, and ICAO very graciously shared with us research from what happened. And it was an iterative process. So, sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to achieve immediate perfection, even with things that none of us have ever experienced. So when we talk about volcano, we talk about 1902, we talk about 1979, but how many of us in this generation have actually had to undertake a cleanup of this nature? So we had to go to the experts who had actually done it before, and in countries that had actually done it before. And ICAO gave us an amazing study of different countries around the world that had experienced ash falls and airports and how they cleaned up. And so it was very much, in some instances, a trial and error process. What we benefited from was looking at those reports from other countries given by ICAO. So we were able to say, okay, so they started here, they started there, this didn't work. So we were able then to craft our own response based on the things that we knew immediately could work, which is why we focused very heavily on removal of the ash in the first instance, then on wetting it down in the second instance. Over the course of the coming days, we too started to experiment with different techniques, moving vehicles, for example, on the runway to get the dust in the air so it could mobilize and then settle it and then remove it. So you would have seen that we were supposed to open at midday last Friday. We then ended up having to delay, and that was really because we were using sweepers and the bristles, there were metal bristles, they found them on the runway, so we then had to go back in and clean them up. So there was no immediate perfection, but there certainly was a huge push for it. And in the shortest possible time frame, we were then able to elevate the experience at the Grantley Adams International Airport from one where it was blanketed in ash to one where the ash was 95% removed. We had metrics that we were measuring every day. They had to submit project reports until we're at a stage where the ash, while still in the atmosphere all over the country, including the Grantley Adams International Airport, is at a bare minimum at this point, but it requires continuous cleaning until it is completely removed, largely because the particles are so fine.
Okay. And my final question to you is that, have you seen any post or heard anything from a traveler, any report from an airline partner, or any complaint from a staffer at the Grantley Adams International Airport that would make you think that last week Friday when we reopened that it was too soon?
Well, what I would say is that when we went into Friday, I had already met with all of our airline partners. I had called for a meeting with all of the airline partners that fly into Barbados, and I had briefed them on what was happening at the Adams International Airport so that they were prepared. We explained to them the process that was going to be used. We had our technical officials there. We also brought in the Met Office to talk about the impact of the ash coming from volcano, even the projections. So our approach really has been engagement, consultation, and openness and sharing. So that was with our airline partners, and so we have continued that engagement at the level of the airport, and they have been in contact. They're required before every flight to speak with the airline partners, and then after every flight they know we're going to call to say, were there any issues? Is it safe? Is the plane safely on the ground? Were there any issues reported? And they compile an incident report daily, and there have been no incidents so far at all. In terms of travelers, we did have one airline that canceled the flight. That was obviously between the airline and the passengers. They made a decision to cancel the flight, and that was unfortunate, and they then subsequently flew up the following day with no issues. There was one airline, as you know, that diverted because of dust in the early days, and they subsequently came back to Barbados the following day with no issues. One outbound British Airways flight also did not take off. That had nothing to do with ash or the Adams International. There was actually a mechanical issue on that plane, and the plane that diverted the following day was actually coming in to serve as a replacement plane for that, but also to bring the replacement part. So when you see a plane not flying out or canceling a flight, we mustn't automatically assume what the reason is. And so we have had really extraordinary responses so far, because people can't imagine that in between what they saw first and what they see now, that this has been the Adams International Airport. And finally, on staff, one of the things that's important for us is making sure that the people who function in this space are as comfortable as those who are passing through it. And so we ensured that the Health and Safety Committee meeting there's a Health and Safety Committee here, that it had to meet. And over the course of the weekend, that committee mobilized. It met on Monday in the first instance, and they then started to go through the entire facility to make sure that all of the areas were okay, that we're able to get a report. And then by Friday, we're going to be looking at what needs to be implemented. From that health and safety report, we've called in for air quality studies to be done to ensure that the air quality is fine. We brought in servicing of all of the AC units twice a day so that it is a comfortable facility. So we have made sure that we have looked at every possible area. And the final thing there is that the airport is not just the Adams International team. We have a number of tenants. We have food service providers, for example, who are here. So we've been working with them, and there was stakeholder communication that went out to all of them. There's a customs department, immigration department, all of those agencies, Goddard's Catering Group, all of them, there has been continuous engagement at the level of the management of the international airport to ensure that we are in a position to keep everybody both safe and comfortable. And the airport team has also been asked to ensure that there's adequate PPE for everybody. And in the event that one thing goes wrong, we built in redundancies so that we can quickly respond. We're not going to always get it right all the time, but by golly, we're going to make sure that we fight really hard to do the best that we can to get as close to getting it right as we can and staying on top of it until the job is completely done. We're not stepping back. So as we head into the latter part of the week, we start talking about each day you have an increasing number of flights. Virgin Atlantic, for example, returned during the course of this week. Over the course of the weekend, that you have an increasing number of flights. So we're ramping up our presence and our interventions as we see the ramp up of flights, because we can't step back. We have to do this well.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shane.
Okay, now we're going to turn to civil engineer here at the Grantley Adams International Airport, Alan Howard, who's going to give us a more technical aspect of things. Alan, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, tell me about this entire cleanup project through your eyes, through the technical standpoint.
Okay, so everyone would have seen the amount of ash we would have had over the last week or so. Mm-hmm. The cleanup project across the airport, included our runways, our taxiways and aprons, where the aircraft park and where the aircraft arrive and depart, and also would have included all of our outdoor areas, our parking lots, our roads, not just for the main terminal, but also for all of our cargo facilities, and also all the other support facilities at the airport, such as the fuel facilities and the engineering department. The cleanup project really would have focused on getting our runway open. It's our key asset. Yeah. It's actually about 11,000 feet long, it's 150 feet wide, and it's 1.7 million square feet of pavement. It's the largest pavement at the airport, and it's our key asset. Without it, we wouldn't be able to function. So the cleanup effort really focused there first. Unfortunately, we didn't have all the assets we really needed to get a job of this scale done ourselves, and we had to bring in 5 external contractors and some additional supervisory assistance from Mr. Joe Steinbach, who helped us really coordinate all the activities from all the players, both internal to Gaia Inc. and through the contractors and other ministries that lent their support to the operation.
I know the amount of ash that I had in my driveway. So when you're talking about 1.7 million square feet of runway, how much ash are we talking about?
Well, so far we've calculated over 80 truckloads of ash we've taken away from the airport, and we're basically still cleaning. Yeah. We've managed to store some on site, and we're going to take that away to an approved dump site as soon as we can. But it is, as you said, a mammoth undertaking.
So when you look at, from a technical standpoint, the amount of ash that was taken away, clearly in terms of everything that needs to be used on the runway, you think it's at a stage that can be used again, and the airport's being reopened, you're satisfied with it?
Yes, we would have coordinated with the Civil Aviation Department and referred to all the relevant annexes and standards to make sure that what we're doing is safe. That's our real focus here as an engineering department, ensuring that safe operations occur, and we've been applying all of our assets, and everyone else has been trying to do their best to ensure that that's the case.
Paint the picture for me, the type of machinery, because you talk about 80 truckloads that was used in this entire undertaking.
So we also would have made use of vacuum sweepers. We would have made use of road broom sweepers, which attach to tractor equipment. We've made use of bobcats and trucks, obviously, to load away the material, to try to get as much material up as possible. We've made use of several water trucks as well, which use non-potable water, either seawater on our land side or treated water from the treatment plant at Bridgetown or at Coverley to try to wash away as much of the ash as possible.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
we really appreciate the effort of all of our staff. Everyone's given 100% from the beginning of this project, and I really would like to thank everybody from our general workers to our operators who really contributed to making this work.
Thank you so much. So you just heard about everything that had to be done to make sure that the airport was once again open, and everything that's being done to ensure that it stays open, from 80 truckloads of ash being taken away to all the inspections that it had to pass. I hope you now have a better understanding of everything that went on. Thanks for watching.